Alarming flood conditions for some after a significant amount of rain over the last several days. We shared this video. A bridge along the East River Trail in De Pere nearly submerged in high water this week.
Tonight, efforts are underway to address flooding in the area and hear what people have to say about the current proposal. Emily Riley tells us how Green Bay's floodplain management team plans to redirect the water.
Flooding along the East River has caused numerous issues, both recently and over the years. In 2019, snowmelt along with rain and frozen ground caused massive flooding, leading to evacuations and 50 houses being condemned. City leaders taking proactive steps Wednesday night to prevent future hazardous flooding, particularly around the East River area in Green Bay. Resiliency coordinator Melissa Schmitz highlighted the city's plans in the works since September that focus on Emily Park.
The park itself would go from being maintained turf grass to wetland species. And so we're not exactly sure what all the plant species would be at this point. It's way too early in the process. But you would still have access to the East River Trail, but the trail might look a little bit different. We may have areas of boardwalks instead of the asphalt.
Nearby residents who attended shared their thoughts on the plan and some concerns with the changes.
We will be taking away the access to the path via Emily Street and Greeno and also the other spur. So we won't even be able to get to the path.
Schmidt says any concerns would be addressed in the final design.
I hope that people will start looking at using some of our city-owned, especially our park areas, in different ways where we can have them for recreational uses like we currently have, but then also use them for other purposes as well.
Project leaders here say it will be up to the park committee and city council to determine if the proposal will be taken to the next phase. Reporting in Brown County, Emily Riley, Action 2 News.